Welcome to everybody who's coming in. How is everybody doing? Great. Good to see. Okay. I'm actually just going to advance to the welcome slide. As people are trickling in, I would love to know where people are calling in from or clicking in from. So feel free to drop your city, state or province, whatever you feel comfortable with in the Zoom chat. I myself am located in Los Angeles, so I'm on Pacific time. But I appreciate everybody who is either staying up late, if you're joining from another country, to be a part of this. So we'll let some people trickle in for a bit. I'm going to look at the chat and see where people are calling in from. Let's see, we have Oregon, we have Ohio, we have New Orleans, Colorado Springs, Oklahoma, more Los Angeles folks, hello. Florida, Oregon again, Philadelphia, Chicago, oh wow. People from the UK, I'm sure it's getting late, so thank you for being here. South Carolina and Croatia, cool. Vancouver, Nigeria, wow, okay. Great international group here. Philadelphia, Tennessee, Oakland, California, Toronto, Sterling, Humboldt, Atlanta. Oh, wow. So many people from all over. Columbia, West Virginia and or Baltimore, Champaign-Urbana, Seattle, Atlanta. Oh, very cool. Okay, so we've got definitely a great collection of folks from all over. Okay. All right. So just to set the tone for what we're going to be talking about today, you guys all know that we're here to hopefully discuss everything about research portfolios for UXR. I know looking at the list of people who signed up, we have a range of people who joined, everything from people who are just considering transitioning to UXR. And then I saw that a few people who are working as UXRs have also signed up for this. So I hope I'll be helpful to you. I may not be very helpful to you, but I'll try. And the goal of this series is for us to become a small, close-knit community where we feel comfortable working towards the goal of portfolios together and identifying the ways or the places where you can conduct UX research. I think when I was transitioning to UX research, trying to figure out what could be a case study, what to put in a portfolio was a big struggle for me. Because the advice that's out there is, find a startup or, talk to people, who own small businesses. And I didn't know of any startups. I also didn't know anybody who had a small business. So I was really stuck for a long time before I figured out how to gain the experience that I needed so that I could start applying to positions. So I hope to help boost you on the way with today's session. I think that Janine, who is supporting us today, will share a networking spreadsheet that I've created for our group. So if, as you listen to this session, you decide maybe this is not a good fit for what you're looking for, at the very least, you can maybe gain a few new people for your network from our networking spreadsheet. So feel free to click into that spreadsheet and fill it out, just whatever information you're comfortable with it. Again, I started the first row of the spreadsheet just to give you an example to go off of, but feel free to be creative if you want. After we host today's sessions, I'm also going to ask you to complete a steerage survey that will help me determine what the rest of this series is going to look like. So it's very important that you complete it if you're planning to follow through with the series. And I thank you for being here on this first day, because you will be the ones to determine how the series actually looks. Since this is the first time we're running this series, I'm really open to feedback and basically shaping the series as much as possible to be what you specifically are looking for, or whatever you need to feel comfortable applying for positions. And then finally, we will also have a community in which we ask questions, help each other out, and then share the like assets or deliverables that we're working on, since this series will probably meet something like once a month over the next few months. That way you can continually gain feedback and make progress without having to wait for the next session. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and move forward. Today's topics, I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm going to answer very quickly some of the most frequently asked questions that I see about portfolios. Then I'll stop for your questions that you might have come in with already. And you can feel free to drop them in the chat too. I think Janine will help me out by just making note of any questions that come up, and I'll let you know if we'll either be answering them later during the session, or if it's something that I will add to my list of frequently answered questions and perhaps answer in text form. We'll talk a little bit about the plan and the tentative timeline for this series. I want to understand if everybody who is planning to participate in the series thinks the timeline looks doable for what they have planned for the next 4 or 5 months. We'll talk a little bit about how to get started. If we have time, we will have breakout rooms to let you discuss that, or we may just discuss it as a group. And then I will send you off with your goals, what to work on before the next session. All right. Okay. So I'm not going to read this whole screen. You're welcome to have a look at it. I will just talk a little bit about, I guess, why I decided to transition to UX. I am a social psychologist, and I knew even when I was doing my PhD that I was not interested in teaching or working in a university setting. So I looked for a lot of applied research positions. I'm from Houston, where we have the world's largest medical center. So most people in psychology, if they don't end up being faculty of some sort, they might end up working in some type of health capacity, either as a biostatistician or research coordinator, et cetera. And as I was doing that, I realized this is not really what I want to do. It's very meaningful work, but I'm not very interested in healthcare. I then had a quick career pause where I moved abroad and could not work in research. So during that time, I was just, working a survival job. I was editing people's manuscripts and looking ahead to try to understand what I could do in the future. And I thought, there's always marketing research. I don't quite have the background for it, but it's something I'm interested in. And I also knew that there was something called usability research, but I thought that I didn't have the background for it, and I didn't want to go back to school. However, as I started looking at job ads and then reading more about UXR, I started to understand that perhaps it was possible for me to transition. And I really liked how UXR is something like the marriage between really serving people, actually having an impact for people, and then being able to make a large impact quickly. As we all know from academia, you might work for years, 5, 10, 15 years on something and see very little, I think, gains from it, or it helped very few people, unfortunately. So I really wanted to make a bigger impact. And long story short, I finally broke into industry early last year. I was a contractor at TikTok for about 6 months. And then I am currently a contractor at Meta. I work specifically on Facebook groups. I'm one of about 70 researchers who works on Facebook groups. So that's just to give me, that's just to give you a little bit of background on what I'm able to give advice on. For example, I have not interviewed with a lot of other companies. I've only interviewed with TikTok and Meta. And I am really only familiar with the social media / entertainment industry. So if you are interested in other aspects of the tech industry, I will try my best to connect you to people or give advice that I've heard, but I may not be the best person to answer your questions. And I also want to say, I have never taught a class. I have never applied for a grant. So I believe many of the people among us are already far ahead of me in that respect. And this is me finally putting myself out there. I have a fear of public speaking. So it's big that I'm even here today. And I want to step out from behind the scenes. I've always done work that's just kind of behind the camera or behind the scenes, and never really put myself in a spotlight before. I also managed to get my 2 positions without a portfolio. So we'll talk a little bit more about this later, but it is possible to become a UXR without a portfolio. And then this is just some fun stuff. We'll skip past it. Let's go over this really quickly because I want to make sure we stay on track. Some of the frequently asked questions about UXR portfolios. What is a UXR portfolio? You've probably seen designers' portfolios for UX designers, and they'll often have splashy graphics, all kinds of mock-ups of like website screens or smartphone screens, and that is not what is expected for a UX researcher. You would likely have maybe a deck or even a doc that contains explanations about any literature search or background research that you do before conducting your study. And then you would talk about what's leading up to that study, why you decide to choose particular methods, and then like the thought process in going back and forth with your stakeholders, and then actually fielding the study, any problems that you run into, how you deal with it, and then talk a little bit about the findings and your recommendations, and if you know what the impact is, what the potential impact is too. So it's quite similar, I think, to a research presentation or a poster, I think, in research, but perhaps more condensed in the way that you might assume that the audience is not necessarily a researcher. It might be a designer, it could be engineers, it could be your product manager, and then like explain the work in a way that's understandable for them. And then also talk a lot about your thought process, because that's what recruiters and hiring managers really want to see. Why did you make the decisions that you did? Why did you choose the methods that you did, the particular users that you decided to survey or interview, or the length of the study that you chose, things like that. How did you decide to deal with problems that you encountered, and why? The form of a UX art portfolio is anything as simple as a website or maybe even just a PDF of slides. It doesn't have to be something elaborate at all. You can, for example, just create slides in Google Slides or in PowerPoint, and then just save it as a PDF. And on any job applications where they ask for a link, you can either upload it to something like SlideShare so that your slides are just available linked to something that's a link, and then paste that link in, or you can upload your PDF as a document as part of the application. So I hope that that makes it feel a little more like something that you can take on, that it's not a big daunting project at all. It really isn't. And we'll go a lot more into the format later when we get closer to making the portfolios. Do I need a UXR portfolio? This is probably something that you've seen debated just about everywhere. And I would say it is possible to get hired without a portfolio. I was, many of my colleagues were. That said, you do need to have case studies to present in an interview. So at the very least, you need some visual format of presentation whether it's something that you keep to yourself until it's time for the interview, or it's something that you actually put out there for recruiters and hiring managers to look at beforehand. You need something that demonstrates that you do have the skills that they're looking for. And I guess I would say it doesn't really hurt to have a portfolio. There were definitely times when I was going through my job application process where there was a space for portfolio and it said it was required for the application, and I had to say, well, I don't have a portfolio. I don't have one ready. I can't get one ready in time. I'm just gonna have to pass on this particular position, even though it looks interesting to me. So it doesn't hurt. If you already have a portfolio, you can plug it right in. And that's another job application that you wouldn't have been able to fill out otherwise. But if you are going to restrict yourself to not having a portfolio, then it is, of course, possible to find a position as well. And something that's probably on all of your minds, can I use academic research in a UXR portfolio? Yes, you certainly can. And people absolutely do. And then I would say, depending on what types of companies you're targeting, some of them would find this just par for the course. For example, companies like Microsoft, Google, and Meta, where PhDs are often hired, they're used to seeing academic research in a UXR portfolio and understand that you may not have done any industry research before to put in a portfolio, and they're perfectly fine with that. There are other companies out there that are perhaps new to hiring people with advanced degrees, or they just really want somebody who has also some demonstrable industry research experience. They might be less likely to prefer that. And that's something that you might have to identify yourself in the course of your applications, in talking to other people who already work there, and then talking with the recruiter or hiring manager to understand what they really want to see in your portfolio. So your portfolio might be a collection of 3 or 4 case studies that showcase in different ways your different strengths, like different methods, different topics or industries that you've done research in. And then if you have more than 3 or 4, you can cycle them out depending on where you're applying to. So if you have 2 or 3 studies that are a lot more relevant to a particular company, put those in your portfolio and just exclude the others. I wouldn't go overboard and include every possible case study that you have. And then finally, what about ongoing projects or NDAs? I've definitely seen people use ongoing projects that are almost complete in portfolios. And then, this would be kind of a situation where you say, these are the findings that are expected, and then these are recommendations that I would make. And then this is the impact that we think is going to happen. It's probably not quite as preferred though. And I think that might just depend on individual recruiter or the individual hiring manager, what they like to see. So if you have other projects to choose from that are complete, those might be preferred. And then you can definitely present work that is under NDA, but you might make it quite vague. You might let them, like your hiring committee, know ahead of time, hey, this particular project is under NDA. They would absolutely understand that. They wouldn't want you to violate NDA, because if they hire you, they hope that you're not going to do the same thing to them in another interview. So you could be very vague about the particular variables that were studied. You could change some of the details, or you could gloss over the findings and just include findings that are so general that it's kind of like expected already. And then just give the amount of information, like impact-wise, that is either already publicly known or that you are able to share. So it's definitely possible to include such projects in a portfolio as well. Let me take some questions since I've been talking a lot. Let's see. Janine, could you help out by maybe boosting any questions to me that?
I sure will, yeah. As soon as I see them in the chat, I will let you know.
Okay, great. And while we're taking a little break here, if anyone has just come in, feel free to drop your information in the networking spreadsheet too. Okay, I think I see one here. Any tips on a good case study? Let's see. Again, this could vary a lot depending on what your recruiter tells you for a particular interview. They might say, showcase a complex study that you have done. So for example, if you've ever done like a multi-stage study, like maybe you've done a diary study where there was some preliminary collection of data first, and then the diary collected, and then some interviews conducted after, that would potentially be a good study to include in a portfolio and then also talk through during an interview. And I think including a variety of methods in your portfolio is good. So if you have completed, 6 or so studies, some of them are quite similar, just choose one out of the similar ones to present, and then look for other studies that you've done that showcase your other strengths. So if your bread and butter in research is surveys, interviews, and diary studies, then choose one case study per method, for example. Or if you are applying to health tech positions and you have a bunch of research that is not related to health, maybe include one of those, but then focus more on the health studies that you've done. I don't know if that makes sense, but I hope that gives you a few examples right there. And let's see, I think I saw.
Okay, so yeah, can you show us a few portfolio examples? That was one of the next questions.
Okay. I won't show any today, but I do plan to show some in later sessions as we get closer to actually putting them together, if that helps. I'll try to get some examples earlier on if I can. Yeah, I'll just talk to people that I know and see if any who would like to share, and see if I can get a range of industries if possible, crossing fingers.
Okay. Another question, any tips on how to translate academic findings where you don't have results like increased sales by so many percentage?
That's a good question. I was thinking, I've had people ask me if this particular study, or sorry, if this particular series is going to deal with translating an academic study into a case study for a portfolio. I feel like this is going to be out of the scope of this particular series, but could be an interesting topic for something like a 2-parter workshop. So I will say as much as I can here, which is it doesn't have to be, impact doesn't have to be shown by increasing a percentage of sales. If your research helped shift the direction of what your department, your team was thinking, maybe you realized you were heading in the wrong direction and you pivoted completely, that's impact. Anything that changed because you were there, that is impact. And you just want to think of, I guess, ways to word that. Let's see, I'm trying to think of, well, maybe if we do such a workshop, we can have people throw out some findings that they've had and we can translate them together. I think that most likely the format of this series is going to be creating a case study from scratch though. So I hope you can wait on an answer for that one. Let's see, doing some others.
So Helen, I kind of compiled all the questions together and sent them directly to you.
Oh, okay.
If that would be helpful.
I think I see that. Okay, let me see where we're at. We may actually want to move ahead, but what I will do after this session is go through these and try to give you a better, more detailed written answer that we can put into our community too. As I don't think I mentioned this actually, but when I go through those FAQ questions again, I would actually like to write out responses for those. So that anyone who wasn't here or wasn't able to jot down everything I was talking about can review them in on your own. Okay, So let's actually move forward, because I want to make sure we have some time for discussion. The plan and timeline for this series. This is what I'm tentatively proposing to you guys. I know that the holidays are coming up, and so I built in a lot of extra time. Normally when I run a study, I've run studies that are from start to finish take about 5 days. So just as an example, on Monday, my PM comes to me, my product manager comes to me and says, we have this question that we want to answer. Where can we answer it? And how quickly can you put it all together? I will sometimes sprint on that with my cross-functional team, my designers or the engineers, whoever has the question. And we put it in front of participants on Wednesday. And then I have a write-up by Friday. So those are how short some of my short studies look. When I run interviews with individual users, the fielding of that, the interviewing of the users, typically takes 3 or 4 days. And then I have like another week to write up the report. So those studies take maybe like 2 weeks. And I've also done diary studies, which may take something like 8 to 10 days and longer to do the write-up because there's a lot more data. And I've also done tracking studies that are like something that you administer every quarter for a year or longer. So for this particular series, we'd like to identify potential questions that you can answer probably in the course of 2 to 3 weeks, but I built in extra time just because taking into account the holidays again, we just want to make sure that no one's feeling rushed. And I know that many people work full-time or students full-time, so this allows you to do a little bit of work, but also complete any other responsibilities that you have in your life. Is there anyone who is seeing potential conflicts with this schedule for them? I'm just curious. Just looking through all the pictures here, but some people are not on screen, so I can't tell. Feel free to speak up if you think that these deadlines are potential problems. I'll try to work my best with you, but the idea is to find a question and project that can be completed fairly quickly, like in 2 or 3 weeks. And then let's see. I'll talk a little bit about identifying potential stakeholders and building the relationship in a second. For people who might already have a potential stakeholder or existing relationship in mind, you can jump right ahead to speaking with those stakeholders to figure out what questions you might want to answer. And then in December, this is kind of like your time to work on your own around any holiday responsibilities that you might have. To tee up the project so that it's ready to field in January. And then I think in January we can go full speed ahead. You'll recruit and screen for your participants. If you happen to be targeting a particular industry or set of users where it's kind of difficult to recruit for them, we'll want to figure that out. So we would like to know that ahead of time, I think, to try to mitigate any delays. And then you'll have your data hopefully by the beginning of February and start analyzing it and putting it together. So I am targeting March for something like 2 sessions where I bring in hopefully a recruiter and hopefully a hiring manager to review some of our portfolios. Since this group does at the moment appear to be a little bit larger than I anticipated, I don't know if everybody will get personalized feedback from both the recruiter and the hiring manager, but anybody who's willing to put themselves out there for review, we'll try to get in as many as we can. I think we'll figure out those details as we get closer to March, because we'll see what the bandwidth of our special guests will be. Any questions about this specifically?
Helen, Sabrina had a question wondering on the previous slide where you talk, or well, on this one where it talks about the project. Is that something that you will assign or not? That was her question.
Do you mean like what the specific question will be and like who you're doing it for? Is that what you mean, Sabrina? Just
Yeah,
want to be sure.
the scope of the project, are we coming up with this, or is this something that you'll suggest? Like, what's the nature of the research that we'll be working on?
Okay, great question. I can help you shape or scope the project, but it will definitely be on you to identify the stakeholders and work with them to understand what open questions they have. And then likely they'll come to you with a list. You can also suggest questions to them too that you think you would be able to answer using the methods that you're strong in. And then from there, you would pick one that seems possible to run in January and have results for by February. But don't get too alarmed. We are going to go into a little bit more detail about how to find these stakeholders and figure out what questions to answer. Does that make sense? Does that cover what your question was?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Any other questions about this particular timeline?
I know you had mentioned, I think someone asked this in the chat as well, as we're looking for stakeholders, etc. How, like, time frame as how long our portfolio presentation should be? Like, since there's going to be a lot of us trying to churn through and get time with the hiring manager or potential recruiter.
So most likely you would not be presenting your portfolio. So it won't be like a case study presentation that you would do in an interview, but more like everything is laid out visually. So they're going to need to be able to understand what's happening just from your PDF or your slide deck. And this is kind of to, I guess, model the experience of a recruiter or a hiring manager going through applications and trying to decide who they're bringing in for an interview. So I think that's what we're going to try to model there. How are you catching their eye? Are you intriguing them enough to where they say, oh, this is interesting. Let's bring this person in for an interview. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions about the timeline and plan? Discussion.
Let's see, Ramit, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, asked, can we collaborate with people from this group, or would it be better if it's solo?
That's a great question. And I'm glad you asked it because I intended to talk about that too. I would not recommend you collaborating with anybody on your project because we will be all together in this community to help each other and give feedback. Generally, when you go in front of interviewers, they will ask you what exactly was your role in this project. And if you were the lead, that's kind of nice and clean instead of saying, well, I did this part, somebody else did this part. It's harder to detangle what your responsibility was in the project. And I think I haven't asked you guys yet how much research experience you have, but I'm guessing because of the particular group that we sent this opportunity out to, that most of you have run studies of your own before. I've also heard that I've seen hiring managers talking where they interviewed two people who presented the same project, and both people claimed to have done the project on their own. So as you might guess, neither person was hired because there was no way to determine who actually did that project. And most likely they were people who had worked on a project together. I don't want that to happen to anyone here. I think that there are plenty of stakeholders and questions out there that can be answered for each of us to have our own project. And if you're feeling any doubts, no worries. I bet a lot of your fellow cohort is feeling the same way. Don't worry, we're going to get through that together. Any other questions? Okay, maybe not. Shall I go ahead and move forward? Okay.
Helen, I have a question about the research project or the case study. Can we bring the case study that we did that is related? I guess like we tried to translate academic research into that, or should we come up with something new based on what we are learning with you? Or
I would suggest doing something new. As I mentioned, I think there might be a place for a completely different series where we help people translate academic research into a case study. And I think that this might be an opportunity for you to do something unrelated to what you've done in academia and maybe tackle something that could be product related or a little bit closer to a user experience project so that you have that variety in your portfolio.
Okay, thank you. Any
Yeah.
suggestions? For example, I come from humanities, and then just to tackle maybe like choose finance or like or different fields, or like going beyond your own field is also suggested, or should be in our comfort zone?
I think maybe people might give different advice. I would probably advise you to think strategically about where you want to go in your career. For example, if you're very interested in fintech, it would be a good idea to start moving in that direction and maybe conduct research in that area, because you'll gain experience with like the variables, the competitors in that space, and maybe even build some connections in that industry while you're doing that. And that said, if you are perfectly happy in the space that you're in and you also want to target a future career in that space, for example, if you are doing a degree in digital media, online communities, and you hope to work someday for Meta or Reddit or something like that, continue to lean into that, because you probably are already a subject matter expert in that topic. Does that make sense? Okay.
Absolutely, thank you.
Awesome. I'm going to, I guess, jump into how to get started so that hopefully we have a little bit of time to discuss this some more. I really suggest identifying warm connections for your potential stakeholders. I was talking before about how I was lost when I was trying to figure out how to to gain experience, because I didn't know anybody who had a startup. I didn't know anybody who ran a website or had a small business. But I started to see, like, as I started to understand what UX research is, I really started to get the idea that it's kind of everywhere. User experience is everywhere. Doesn't have to be a digital product, doesn't have to be like something tech specifically that you do a project on. Because there are certainly people who do user experience research on like in-store experiences, for example. And then if it's a warm connection, if it's something you're already affiliated with, you already have an in, you might already know the people in charge to talk to, you're already very familiar with the space, and that's less ramping up that you would need to do, especially considering that we have a relatively short time to complete the project in. So think about places that you currently volunteer, either professionally or just in your personal life. Are you completing any type of service for your department where you're running a program for them? Because I think we can say that program evaluation is a type of user experience research. Do you yourself have anything like a side hustle, like a Etsy shop, or like a YouTube channel that you run, where you yourself deal with a community? And I'll give an example here. I have a hobby where I collect postcards. There is a website that's associated with this community. There are also Facebook groups that are associated with this particular hobby. And I ended up doing just a project for the website, helping them improve their onboarding experience, and then trying to develop a new feature for that community. So it can be as random as that. Does your university or department or program need a website revamp? I think most departments out there have a website, so you could offer to conduct some user research on that, and then work with the web designer for your program or your department to implement the changes, find out what questions they want answered, etc. Are there any other affiliations in your personal life? Do you have a sibling or a child who is in a school program or club where maybe they're looking for volunteers, but they have trouble getting volunteers, and you need to figure out for them how they can improve their volunteer recruitment process? And so there are just a few examples that I've listed here. I can give some examples for somebody that I mentored. She also came to me and said, well, I don't know anybody with a startup. I don't know anyone who runs a business. Where can I find these warm connections for stakeholders? So I said, let me just look over your LinkedIn profile. Thankfully, she had one that was really very carefully filled out. And I saw that she volunteered at a pet shelter. She was a board member for a women's association. She did some freelance tutoring for extra money. She was also a moderator for a Twitch community, and she also did peer mentoring at her university. I would actually like to see if anyone can throw out suggestions for possible UX research that could be conducted in these spaces. So think about that, these 5 things that were connections that this mentee already had. Any ideas for things that she could have looked at? And feel free to throw out bad ideas too. That's totally okay, because sometimes bad ideas lead to really great ideas. Any suggestions? Let's see. I'm looking in the chat right now.
I have an idea in regards to the freelance tutor on a tutoring site experience. So
Sure, go ahead.
Possibly evaluating the user experience on the tutoring site and maybe seeing what some improvements could be, what the learning experience is, what the impact on the learning experience is.
That's a great suggestion. And it sounds like you, in that particular study, if you were to conduct such a study, you would focus on the learner's experience. But remember, in any type of marketplace, there's also the other side, the tutor's experience. Are the tutors finding the interface something that works for them? Are there pain points that they have as they try to teach people through the tutoring site? So you could also look at specific aspects of the tutor's experience. Maybe they have problems uploading their courses or reaching the right type of student. What features could that tutoring site potentially introduce to improve things for tutors too? Any other suggestions?
For the pet shelter, she could look at the basically the adoption process and see if there's any issues, frustrations, pain points within that.
Yep, absolutely. For example, let's dive deep into that. Let's say that pet shelter has something like a free adoption Saturday, where people who adopt on that particular Saturday don't need to pay the adoption fee. So it's a way for them to get more people into the shelter. But then that could create lots of confusion. So there are many aspects of that process that could be improved potentially, like the advertisement of this particular free adoption day, maybe how they intake the people who are potential adopters into the shelter, maybe the process that they show the pets to the adopters for. Or maybe even the forms that they fill out to actually decide to adopt the pet. I don't know if there's usually like fostering involved before adopting, but just imagine that there are all these very specific experiences within the whole experience of an adoption day at a shelter that you could focus on. And this is something that we'll think of as we talk about scoping. There's no need to get too ambitious with researching the entire adoption day experience. That could become a really large project So you could look at specific aspects of it, and that could keep the project a lot simpler. Any other suggestions for these 5 ideas that I threw out to this mentee?
Looking at the board member for Culturally Based Women's Association,
Mhm.
my mom did something similar to this, and one issue we found was the platforms they're using to expand their reach to other people were really like siloed in a certain community. So expanding to certain employee research groups or organizations that may have something similar, so that they can recruit them and they can expand their network. Or what was the other thing we did? Or I suggested to her. A lot of the advertising they did was like door to door, pen and paper. I'm like, please make it virtual. It's hurting me. But yeah, so
Absolutely, absolutely. That's great. I love that you have essentially conducted a study like this before. It just kind of shows that I guess the point that I'm trying to make is there are kind of ideas out there everywhere. And it doesn't have to be something huge where you revamp an entire process. It can be a very specific part of the experience that you try to understand and then design or improve. Let's see, do we have the time for the breakout rooms? Well, I think we're down to about 12 minutes according to my clock. Maybe instead of oops, sorry, I always do the wrong thing. Maybe instead of having the breakout rooms this time, let me have people throw out some of their own warm connections that they're thinking about, and we can try as a group to give you suggestions for aspects of that experience that could be studied. Does anyone want to volunteer something from your own life that you think is like ripe for research?
The one thing I've noticed just being on a lot of different organizations that are trying to do hybrid meetings is that is a major challenge, especially for people who are attending online. When we have an in-person option, there's been a lot of comments that they can't hear, they can't see, they're not having a good experience. And I think that's probably going to continue where we have hybrid events. So that might be one area to look at that could be relatively quick, I think, to get feedback.
Okay, is this something that I guess you've seen in your own like volunteer or personal involvement?
Yeah, I could think of two organizations I work on now where this has been a struggle.
Okay, yeah, I definitely agree. This does sound like something that could have a huge impact and really improve the user experience, hopefully for both people who are attending in person and online, because yes, having to somehow navigate the challenges of both hybrid or of both online and in person haven't been solved well yet.
No, not yet.
Yeah, okay, so this is great. This is a good start. Does anyone have other suggestions for, I think Joanna is what your name is? Okay, other ideas that she could look at in this particular setting?
I have some comments on Joanna's because I'm a remote worker where we usually ask for hybrid opportunities where the events are in person. And from other side, they usually prefer the in-person, and then they say, we don't have a bandwidth, or they don't want to advertise this option. And then they try to accommodate in the last minute with whatever they have. And I wonder what would be the stakeholder conversations, like whom to talk, right? Like who are the decision makers in that? And being remote, do you have much more say? If you were in person, that might be different approach with your proposal. So those are the things to consider.
Those are some great questions. And I think, Joanna, you would know best, being that you were part of these organizations, but it seems like getting the ear of the people who can actually affect any change that you suggest is going to be important. But then also learning who might fight against that change, and getting early buy-in would be important too. One of the things that often comes up in UX research at a large, or not even a large organization, but when you're working with any type of team, is that if you propose change and the people who are going to be impacted by it or who are involved in the decision making aren't looped in early, so that they can have their say early on and see like the benefit of what your recommendations can be to them, there's sometimes going to be resistance to whatever you recommend, and then you may not be able to affect the change quite as much. So carefully identifying who could be a blocker in the process of improving this experience is going to be important for Joanna. Does anybody else want to suggest some other warm connection that they have in their life? And we can try to come up with an idea for that. No?
I can share.
So oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh, I don't know who's talking. Do we have two people speaking here?
I can go ahead. I'm Kara.
Hi, Kara.
I collect pre and post class assessment learning data in my department. And I'm not like quite sure how to really translate that to be super like UX focused yet, but I think that it's an opportunity that I want to think a little bit more about.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anyone have any suggestions? I bet among this group, somebody also has done something very similar for their department. So I wonder if we have some suggestions for aspects of the process that could be studied.
So a question I have is, are they, if you wanted to make it digital product focused, are they using any online tools? And you could do some kind of study around that. And I think we should probably connect. I've done some similar things because I was an assistant principal of a high school. And so my portfolio as it stands involves something very similar. But yeah, I've started to think about like Google Classroom or, you know, whatever kind of tools they're using, and you could kind of do usability tests with that, or just interview them on their experience, or watch their onboarding of that product and how difficult or easy it is for them to even get signed up and use it. So there's a lot of different things I think you could do there.
Oh, great. I hope you guys will connect after this. I guess I'll take another moment to say, if you haven't gotten yourself on the networking spreadsheet, please look for that link. Maybe Janine can send it again for anyone who might have missed it in the rest of the chat. And I think we have a few minutes left, so I'm actually going to move forward. I hope that we're going to continue this conversation a lot more once we have everybody set up in our online platform for the community. These are your next immediate steps. Again, join the spreadsheet if you'd like to. I highly recommend networking. I have found, I think, all of my positions through networking. Honestly, your network is everything career-wise. I will be leveraging my network to find the guest speakers for this series, as well as any upcoming workshops that we do based on feedback that you give me. So the people that are in our network are really just going to help us and our strengths. I will also send out the steerage survey after this session that I would love for everybody who would like to continue this series to complete, to help determine the nature of the rest of the sessions. And then we'll also share out the link to the community afterwards too. One of the questions you'll see in the steerage survey is about which platform to use. Janine has been very kind to set up a Slack community for us already, but I want to understand if that is the best platform for everybody in this particular cohort, just in case there's somebody here who, for whatever reason, chooses not to use Slack, or if there are more people who just prefer a different platform, I'm open to considering that as well. And these are your goals for the next session. Don't be alarmed by this amount of text, but we will share this to the group later on. Feel free to take a screenshot if it helps you get started right away. I'd like you to spend the next few weeks thinking about your personal and professional connections for stakeholders. Identify something that's very likely, as well as 1 or 2 backups, just in case something doesn't work out. That definitely happens a lot in research, where they're excited, you have a potential idea that would be perfect for them, but the timing is just wrong. Maybe they're changing part of their experience already, and it would just be confusing to introduce new changes in the middle of January, what have you. So have a couple of candidates that you're thinking about. And I've also thrown out some potential places to find cold connections if you absolutely must go in that direction. I have personally met very interesting entrepreneurs on lunchclub.ai. Fishbowl is something like LinkedIn, but anonymous. So when you are posting on Fishbowl, you can see what role somebody works in or what company they work for, but you don't know their name. That's another potential place to fish around for ideas. Angel.co is part of Angel List, where I think co-investors and founders find each other, but they are also often hiring as well. So you could look on there for at least company ideas, if not an actual job. And definitely just to poke around in other volunteer orgs. I have a list that I shared in the networking spreadsheet. It's a huge Google Doc that has places where you can find volunteer experiences. You can consider taking an idea of your own to, say, Code for America or Hack for LA, and being the project owner for that idea, and then just asking designers and engineers to help you actually make that particular idea happen, and you can be the UX researcher for it. I think that would probably be a heavier lift though, but that option is out there. And then just keep an eye out for any new startups or apps related to your personal passions. There might be something that you're already using that is a relatively new app or website, and they may not have a UX researcher or even know anything about UX research, and you can just kind of I guess, teach them about it and then propose a project to them. For example, I like to read. I receive a lot of newsletters about books, and sometimes in these newsletters, they talk about new websites out there for keeping track of books. So Goodreads is probably the most well-known book tracking website, but there are other apps and websites for it that are popping up, and those are definitely places that you could approach to find out if they're looking for UX help. But translate that to your own personal passions. Just really keep your eyes and ears open. They're out there for sure. And then these are some of the questions that you want to consider as you decide which stakeholders and projects are going to be the most likely. So I think we are at time. Does anyone have any final questions before I let you all go? Feel free to pop in. I think I see some things popping into the chat. Oh, everyone's saying thank you. Of course, I'm so glad that I can offer some help, and I hope that I will be helpful to you guys as we work on this together. And once the community is set up, feel free to come in and ask your questions too. I will be looking at what you say in the steerage survey to decide what channels we have in our community. So that I'll set up specific channels for introducing yourself, talking about your projects, asking questions that are unrelated, etc. Okay. I am going to let you guys all go if there aren't any specific questions about the next session ahead that you want me to answer now. I'm sure you'll come up with more questions and I will be available to answer them. All right. Anything, anybody? No? Okay, I'm calling it. Thank you everybody for coming, and I'll see you in December.